Hello everyone, welcome back to Amy's Bookshelf. It will come as no surprise to you if you've seen any of my content that I don't like fantasy. I find a lot of fantasy books, especially high fantasy books, very complicated, hard to understand. All the world building I find really hard to keep track of, and in the end I find them just quite exhausting, and the payoff for me is never really worth it. There are a few exceptions to that. There are some fantasy books I do like, but very few, and generally speaking I don't gravitate towards fantasy. However, this video is basically my way of showing other people like me who don't love fantasy and sci-fi as well, that there are some lighter fantasy and sci-fi books that I think are perfect for people who normally read a lot of, say, contemporary historical fiction, anything that isn't normally fantasy based and normally set in the real world. So I have 15 books and all of them dip into either a fantasy or a sci-fi element, but the majority of the plot is based in the real world. So I think they are a perfect way to segue into the genres without fully committing to them, and maybe whet your appetite to read something that's a bit more into those sci-fi and fantasy genres. So yeah, that's basically what this video will be. I hope I can prove to you that if you are like me and you really don't like fantasy and sci-fi books, that you don't have to just avoid any mention of them generally, and there are definitely some books that straddle the genres really well. So like I said, there are 15 books and I have split them, just looking at them there, I've split them into 4 categories. So the first one is magic, the second one is time travel, the third one is Groundhog Day, and the fourth one is monsters. So all of these books will fit somewhere into that category, and I'll go through them one by one, tell you a little bit about them, and yeah, hopefully pique your interest a little bit and you'll want to pick up one or two. Okay, let's get started. So the first category is magic, and I have 3 books here that I think aren't too heavily into the fantasy sci-fi genre, but that you can still really enjoy if you want to dip into those genres a little bit. So the first one is The Magician's Lie by Greer McAllister. So I always, when I talk about this book, say that if you are a fan of The Night Circus, which is an incredibly popular book, that you should pick this up. It's really underrated. It doesn't have that many reviews and ratings on Goodreads, so I would really recommend it as well if you're looking for like under the radar books. And yeah, the reason that I say it's for fans of The Night Circus is that it follows a magician and then basically turns into this thriller murder mystery plot. So there is a very slight element of magic to it, but 100% it is grounded in reality, and I don't think that you need to have a real grasp on the like magic rules, which a lot of the time with fantasy you have to really understand the rules of the world in order to understand the book itself. This isn't so deep and heavy into that, so you can go into it quite lightheartedly and not worry too much about that, but I think it's a perfect way to dip into the fantasy magical element without committing too much. The next one in this list is All Our Hidden Gifts by Caroline O'Donoghue. Again, this is actually very similar. So the element of fantasy in it is that the main character picks up some tarot cards, so there's an element of tarot reading and fortune telling to it, but it also turns very much into a mystery, and it's all about her friend who goes missing. So again, it's very slight element to this book, but the majority of the genre I would say would be mystery rather than fantasy, and I think it's just kind of a fun way to explore the themes of like tarot reading and fortune telling, like I said, without making the whole book revolve around it. This book is also really great for representation, and just overall I think it's a young adult mystery book done really well, so yeah, recommend that one. And the final one in this list is This Poison Heart by Kaylin Bayron. There is actually a second one. This is a duology called This Wicked Fate. The second one I think is a lot more heavy into fantasy, but I think this one is the perfect combination of contemporary and fantasy. So it focuses on the protagonist. She has magical abilities. She can like grow flowers and create things from nature, and there's also like a Greek mythology element to it, but it is set in New York. It's about the protagonist and her 2 mums, and it follows their sort of family dynamic as well as this magical storyline. But yeah, I think this is a perfect light fantasy read. I don't think you need to really understand Greek mythology well. I think This Wicked Fate, again, like I said, is perhaps a little bit more complicated and you do need to understand it a bit more. But once you've read this one, I think you'll want to read the next one. And even if it is a bit heavier, that's okay because you've already read this and understood that, and then it will ease you into it nicely. So yeah, like I said, it's a good segue into that if Greek mythology isn't normally something that you would read. But yeah, this is a perfect way to see a bit of magic without it being the whole book. And the second category is time travel. So yeah, I actually have realised that I've read a lot of books with time travel in them, and so that is why these are split into two categories. The first one is time travel and the second one is Groundhog Day, because I feel like Groundhog Day time travel is kind of a very different genre in a way, because it's very specific in the way that the characters time travel, so that's why I wanted to split them up. So the first one, or first two, is the Before the Coffee Gets Cold trilogy, it is now, by Toshikazu Kawaguchi. I haven't got the third one. If you saw my video a few weeks ago about the series that I've started and not finished, this was part of it. The reason I haven't got the third one is because it's not in paperback yet, and look how nice they are. I obviously want the third one to be nicely sat with these on my shelf. I don't want a hardback that yeah, will have to sit separately. So haven't got the third one yet, but I have read the first two. So these are more sci-fi rather than fantasy. I think time travel generally is more sci-fi than fantasy, and it is about a cafe in Tokyo where customers can go and sit on a specific table, have a cup of coffee and travel into the past or the future. These books are amazing because they are so compellingly convincing that you forget that time travel isn't possible. The time travel element is so minor because you are so captivated by these stories, by the characters and their relationships, and they're really emotional and they take you on a journey and they are really beautiful stories. And yeah, the time travel is just secondary to that. So the characters will go to this cafe. They're kind of told like short stories, I suppose, because each chapter is a different character. And you sort of understand a bit more about why they want to time travel, and then see them do that and then see the consequences of what happens after they've done it. But yeah, like I said, you kind of forget that time travel isn't possible because it's done in such a realistic way. So that's why I think these are a perfect example of like a light sci-fi book that you can dip into. And I'm really looking forward to reading the third one. Next is One Last Stop by Casey McQuiston. This is just a really fun, beautiful sapphic romance, and again, the time travel is almost secondary to the whole plot. If I was going to describe the genre of this book, I would 100% describe it as a romance. I wouldn't describe it as a sci-fi book, and I think that goes for all of these. Their primary genre isn't really fantasy or sci-fi, it's something else, and this fantasy sci-fi element is secondary to that. So yeah, this is a really fun romance. It's set in New York, and it is about August, who's just moved there, and she meets Jane on the subway, and she immediately has feelings for her, but then realises something is a little bit off, and we find out that Jane is actually stuck on the subway car, having travelled there from the 70s, I believe, and she is stuck on this subway car forever. So yeah, like I said, the romance element is 100% at the forefront of this book. It's about their story, it's about their meeting, and I really loved that. And the sci-fi time travel bit just happens to be there too. But this book is really great, like I said, for romance, for found family. It's got really good characters, really great storytelling. I love Casey McQuiston's books anyway, so yeah, would really recommend this as a light sci-fi read. And the final one is Wrong Place, Wrong Time by Gillian McAllister. Again, this is time travel and this is in the thriller genre. Again, very much a thriller, not a sci-fi book. So this one is about a protagonist whose son murders somebody and she witnesses it happen. And then when she wakes up the next day, she realises she's moved back in time a day. She goes about her day, and again, when she goes to sleep, she finds out she's moved back in time again, and this keeps happening until she can solve the reason for why her son would murder somebody. It's really interesting, and what I loved about this book, it was actually a book club pick for us in my book club, and what I really loved about it was how it wasn't about the sci-fi, it wasn't about the murder even, it was about a mother's love for her son. And I think when Gillian McAllister wrote this, that was very much what she wanted to emulate with the book. And there's a little bit at the end that explains the power basically that a mother can have for her son and the really strong emotions and the power that they actually have. I won't go into it in too much detail because it is spoiler, obviously it's a thriller, so I don't want to spoil anything. But yeah, again, time travel very much secondary, but it's a really gripping thriller, so I would recommend that. Okay, and then our third category is Groundhog Day books. So these are, again, time travel books, but it's a Groundhog Day style plot. So if you don't know what that is, it's basically where the character or characters relive the same day over and over and over again. So the first one is a little bit interesting because it's not just a day that the character relives. Basically, Life After Life by Kate Atkinson is about the protagonist. Ooh. No, it doesn't say it on the back, and I don't remember what this is called because I read it like 6 years ago. But the protagonist basically lives their life over and over again, but in different time periods. And it's really interesting. So the main genre of this book, I would say, would be historical fiction, because it really goes through a lot of famous historical events that happens. But yeah, it's really interesting. And again, like I've said with so many of these, you forget that the Groundhog Day, the time travel part of it, isn't real because it feels so grounded in reality. The book very much explores the characters' journey that they go on through living their life and what they learn through living it over and over again, and the time travel is secondary to that. So yeah, this is one I really want to reread, and I believe it's part of a series. I think the next one is called God in Ruins, which is the same family. So I'm not sure whether that one is also like a Groundhog Day style element. But yeah, I do want to read more from Kate Atkinson, but this one is a really compelling book that just happens to have a little bit of sci-fi in it. The next one is by Christina Lauren, and it is called Inner Holidays. This is a really cute romance. Again, like One Last Stop, I'd very much categorise this as a romance and not a sci-fi book. And this one is set at Christmas, so I would recommend waiting until December to read it because it feels very festive. And it's about some families that go away to a lodge for Christmas, and the protagonist getting a second chance at romance, and her exploring her feelings for the person that she thinks she loves. And again, same with all of them, you forget the Groundhog Day bit isn't really real. And I think it's one of those things where, because it's so secondary to the plot, you also don't have to question the logistics of it too much. I think when it's a really integral part of the plot, you think to yourself, how could this possibly happen, you know, like, and you start to pick it apart. But with this, you don't really think about it too much because you don't want to overthink it. You're invested in the romance, so the rest of it isn't really important. But yeah, that is a really great romance book, so would recommend. Next is Opposite of Always by Justin A. Reynolds, and again, Groundhog Day style romance. So this is about Jack and Kate who meet at a party, and again, this isn't just one day, this spans a period of time. But 6 months after they meet, Kate dies, and when she does, Jack wakes up and it is the morning of the party again. So it's him reliving their experience together and him trying to work out whether going back in time could somehow save her life. I really love this book. It's so compellingly written. There's so much emotion and depth. I loved it so much. And again, you forget that the time travel bit is even there. So as a romance, I think this is a really beautiful book, and the ending is perfection. So I'd really recommend it. And finally, we have The 7 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle by Stuart Turton. This is also called The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle. It is the same book if you have seen it. And once again, it is a Groundhog Day style mystery thriller. So this is set in a house where there is a party going on and there is a murder, and our protagonist wakes up in a different body every morning until he can solve the murder. I think it spans 7 days, and the protagonist, Aidan Bishop, like I said, wakes up in a different body, and he is trying to solve the murder of Evelyn Hardcastle. And I loved it. I was so gripped. I spoke in my last video about how Stuart Turton is one of my go-to auto-buy authors because I think his books are so gripping. They're really clever thrillers, and clever in a way that doesn't overcomplicate things, but the payoffs are always really, really satisfying. So again, you forget the Groundhog Day bit is even a sci-fi element, and you're just invested in the murder mystery element. So yeah, would really recommend this as a gripping thriller. Okay, and that leaves us to our final group, which is monsters. So all of these books have some kind of monster, mythical creature in them, which makes it a little bit fantastical, but again, grounded in reality. So our first two are part of the same series, and they are Pet and Bitter by Akwaeke Emezi. So Pet came out first, and it is a utopia, and Bitter is the prequel to Pet, but Bitter is a dystopia rather than a utopia. So we find out how we ended up in the world, in the utopian world that is Pet. So the reason that this is in this light fantasy genre is because the creature in it, so the creature in this is called Pet, and it is this creature that is created through a painting, and the creature is there to protect the people from the monsters in the world, basically. So this is a utopia because none of the monsters are there anymore, they've all been eradicated. But when Pet resurfaces, they realise that a monster may still be around. Bitter has a lot more of like a monster element to it because it's a dystopia and we haven't reached the point yet where the monsters have all been eradicated. I'm being quite vague, but there's elements to these books that are very much spoilers if I go into too much detail, so that's why I don't want to. They're not long books, so there's only so much you can say about the plot without spoiling them. But yeah, Akwaeke Emezi is again, same as Stuart Turton, one of my favourite auto-buy authors. I love their writing, and these are actually some of the first books I read by then, or Pet was anyway. So yeah, really great storytelling, so much depth and layers to them, and there just happens to be this creature in it called Pet. So yeah, I really love these and would recommend. Next is The House in the Cerulean Sea by TJ Klune. So this is about this little orphanage, and it's about the children in the orphanage who are all like magical children in some respect. So a couple of examples, one of them is the son of the devil, another one I think is a gnome, so they all have some kind of like magical abilities or something that doesn't make them human. So that element of it is really interesting. I think it's kind of described like an Umbrella Academy, X-Men style feel to it, but again very much secondary to the main plot, which really is a romance, and it's about a man who goes to the orphanage in order to inspect it, and he meets the person running the orphanage, and it's about their story, them connecting, finding each other, and also learning more about the children and what that means for each of the individuals too. Yeah, it's a really beautiful book. I really love this. TJ Klune is a really good author for light fantasy or light something reads. His other book, which I have read, called Under the Whispering Door, deals with the afterlife, so obviously elements of that feel quite fantastical, but yeah, it's a perfect way to segue into the genre without committing too much. And our final book is The Girl from the Sea by Molly Knox Ostertag. This is a graphic novel. I'll show you some images. Yes. Yeah, so this is quite a quick read, obviously because it's a graphic novel, and also would describe this as a romance rather than a fantasy book. So the reason it is in this list is because the main character is our protagonist, this human girl, and she meets this character who is a selkie. A selkie is a like mythical creature who in the water looks like a seal, but when they're on land looks like a human. So yeah, it's very much about their romance. It's also about this character's sort of coming of age story, about her finding her identity, about her family, and her just exploring and thinking about all of that, also while realising that she might have feelings for this character, which I think is called Kelty. Yeah, Kelty and Molly. No, Morgan and Kelty. So yeah, a really great romance, obviously great graphic novel as well. Yeah, and a great way to dip into some magical creatures without overwhelming yourself. So I hope you've enjoyed these lists. Like I said, I'm a real advocate for not enjoying high fantasy, but very much enjoying light fantasy. I think it can be really easily done if you only really read like contemporary books set in reality, but you can dip your toes into these genres without committing too much and without being overwhelmed by too much world building or new words, new names that you've never heard of and have to try and understand. Yeah, so I hope you've enjoyed. Let me know if you are going to read any of these books, or if you have any of these books, or if you have any other examples of like light fantasy sci-fi books which you think would be a perfect way for other people to be introduced to the genres. Please like this video if you enjoyed it, and please subscribe to my channel as well. I'm really close to 1,000 subscribers, which is really exciting, so yeah, please subscribe if you want to see more. Yeah, I hope you've enjoyed, and I will see you next time. Bye!